In addition to lying to reporters, the City of Orlando's Office of the Mayor also lied to commissioners about the circumstances surrounding one of the deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history. On June 28, 2016, just 16 days after the shooting at Pulse Nightclub, Heather Fagan, Deputy Chief of Staff of the Office of the Mayor, sent a Q&A document to city commissioners. The information presented in this document relied on inference, conjecture, beliefs, and the omission of key facts. It was meant to serve as a reference tool, helping to further disseminate misinformation about the mass shooting to the questioning public. As being one of the first documents produced by the city, we can see how the city immediately positioned itself to defend Pulse by downplaying the nightclub's violations, without conducting an investigation, without inspecting the building after the shooting, and in direct contradiction of the documented facts. The Office of the Mayor leaped to defend Pulse without first knowing all the facts. Now, why would the Office of the Mayor do this? Because the city knew that Pulse was operating out of compliance for over 6 years, and that they failed to protect its citizens by not bringing the nightclub into compliance prior to the shooting. Through the questions that the Office of the Mayor asked itself, we can see what the City of Orlando needed to address for possible liability. The document begins with the following false statement. City records on Pulse show a generally compliant and safe building. City attorneys plopped in the word generally to give some wiggle room in telling the truth. But word tricks can't erase what's documented. City records show that Pulse was actually operating out of compliance and in violation of multiple city codes. Pulse was not generally compliant, it was quite simply in violation. One of the most encompassing violations was Pulse's zoning violation, that it operated as a nightclub in violation of its approved conditional use permit. This was documented by the City of Orlando as early as 2004 and again in 2010. But in June 2021, the Office of the Mayor denied this violation. They claimed that nightclubs are classified as eating and drinking establishments, which Pulse was approved to be. However, we know from historical records and the current municipal code that this was not true in 2016, and it is not true now. Nightclubs are not considered by the city as eating and drinking establishments. They are classified as a different use, as indoor recreation. After the Office of the Mayor made this false statement, the zoning department confirmed what the municipal code shows, that nightclubs are indeed a different use than a restaurant. On July 2nd, 2021, a city zoning official stated in an email exchange, quote, "You can't just convert a restaurant into a nightclub. Those are two different uses. A nightclub is not the same as a restaurant." The officer of the mayor knew this. This is why, in the Q&A document, they asked themselves, "Were you aware it was being used as a club?" Then they failed to answer this question. Why would city attorneys even pose this question if there was no issue with Pulse operating as a nightclub? Furthermore, why would they not answer it? This violation is central to the issues at Pulse because the public was presented with evidence during the trial of the shooter's wife that showed the shooter found Pulse by Googling specifically for downtown Orlando nightclubs. If Pulse was operating as it was approved, as a martini bar and restaurant, it would have never appeared in the results of the shooter's Google search. He did not search for downtown Orlando martini bars, downtown Orlando restaurants, or even downtown Orlando gay bars. He searched specifically for downtown Orlando nightclubs. Although this was reported in The Intercept, we have submitted a public records request to the FBI for the shooter's cell phone records so we can independently verify that this is what happened. Other code violations are obvious, and they are just as important. These can be seen simply by doing a side-by-side comparison between Pulse's building plans. The last approved and permitted building plans for Pulse were from 2004, when the nightclub opened. Now, even though these were permitted and approved by the city's permitting division, they were different than the building plans approved by the Municipal Planning Board. The floor plans that you likely have seen in the media were from 2010. These building plans show Pulse's unpermitted renovations and were sitting in an employee's inbox at the time of the shooting. They were never officially recorded with the city because the owners never pulled permits for the renovations these building plans depict. When we compare the two plans, we can see that windows were removed without permits. This is concerning when a survivor, immediately after the shooting, recounted that he did not know how to escape the nightclub because of the lack of windows.
There was nowhere to go. There was no exit. There was no window to break to get out.
Photographs taken of the interior of Pulse by the FBI and released in 2017 show that even the windows facing Orange Avenue were boarded up and completely covered by the nightclub's unpermitted outdoor patio bar. These windows were required by the City of Orlando to maintain 15% transparency. Did the office of the mayor really think that walling over required windows was not a life safety issue when it told commissioners, quote, "We don't believe that there were any life safety issues inside the building"? The city documented that the unpermitted patio bar modified the nightclub's parking lot and violated city code. We know that one person was murdered on this illegal patio that was fenced in by an unpermitted fence that was also in violation of city code. We can also see the unpermitted dance floor where 20 people were murdered and where tables and chairs were supposed to be. As noted by a city inspector during an inspection of Pulse, there are no tables or chairs as typical in a restaurant. When comparing the plans, we can also see new walls and hallways were constructed. In December 2016, the Police Foundation released a critical incident review that repeatedly cites that narrow hallways hindered rescue. There is also an interview with a victim who said it was a narrow hallway that impeded the escape of people trying to get out of the nightclub.
The hallway where we were trying to enter to get out, to get freedom, is only the size of where me and you are in the length and width of it. So you can only imagine 95 people trying to get in this small area as the width of me and you. With that going on and trying to enter out of that door, I think that's where me and my friend lost touch at.
There are no hallways in the building plans for Pulse that were approved by the city. All hallways were the result of unpermitted renovations. Why did the office of the mayor ignore these violations, which are clearly visible when comparing the two sets of plans? The only part of the building not visible in the building plans is Pulse's second floor, where shooting victims were trapped for nearly 35 minutes while the shooter continued to murder their friends below. One of the trapped victims on the second floor was bleeding out during these 35 agonizing minutes from a gunshot wound to his stomach. There were no official photographs of Pulse's second floor until the FBI released its photos to the public. To date, there are no records that show that inspectors with the City of Orlando ever went up the ladder to inspect the second floor. If the city ever inspected the second floor, they would have noticed that there was no guardrail around the ladder opening, which building code would have required according to the city's own documents. So we know that this alone would have never passed inspection. But you do not need to be a building inspector to understand that the second floor was not permitted and violated code. The FBI photographer even made the decision to document clear electrical and building violations. They weren't documenting anything related to gunfire when the photographer photographed broken ceiling panels, extension cords, and wires strung over the walls. Public records show that, like the dance floor, Pulse's second floor was an unpermitted addition that was modified without going through the proper construction process as required by Florida law. Rosario Poma presented a mezzanine and DJ loft for Pulse in 2004 through amended building plans. But after the city said that he could not operate Pulse as a nightclub, that he had to remove the dance floor and conform to what was approved by the Municipal Planning Board, Rosario submitted new building plans with the mezzanine and dance floor removed. This is what the Office of the Mayor was referencing when they noted that some building plans, quote, could be superseded by subsequent plan submittals. Why would Pulse Orlando have a DJ loft and dance floor if it was not allowed to operate as a nightclub? We know from the FBI's photos taken in the aftermath of the shooting that even though the proposed mezzanine and dance floor were removed from the building plans, they were never removed from the actual building. The fact that these violations were passed over by city inspectors over and over and over again, despite some of them even being documented during inspections, shows that the city failed to keep Pulse patrons safe by not enforcing building, zoning, and fire codes. Pulse's unpermitted renovations were illegal and, in and of themselves, were a life safety issue, even according to the fundamental requirements stated in 10.1 of the Florida Fire Code. In addition, the city cannot definitively say there were no life safety issues when there were no permits or building inspections of the unpermitted work. Permitting and code compliance are to ensure life safety. The reason why code enforcement and permits exist is for life safety. The city even called off an inspection to document code violations at Pulse after the shooting. In an email from Fire Marshal Tammy Hughes for Chief Roderick S. Williams, written on the day of the shooting, June 12, 2016, states, quote, "Once the scene is safe, I will have Fire Marshal Tammy Hughes evaluate the facility to ensure that it was in compliance with all applicable codes. This may take a few days before she can enter, but when she does and completes her findings, that I will provide an update." Through public records requests, we discovered that the city called off this inspection. The city of Orlando had no interest in documenting code violations at the Pulse nightclub. Unless the city was worried about its own liability, why wouldn't they want to know, definitively, what code violations existed inside a Pulse after what was then being reported as the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history? So records do not show a compliant nightclub. They show a nightclub rife with unpermitted renovations that were never fully inspected by building inspectors. The Office of the Mayor began this document with a lie. Through the Q&A document, the Office of the Mayor also downplayed Pulse's unpermitted work and made statements that suggested that building permits are no big deal. In the Q&A document, they said, quote, "The city found out about the unpermitted work after it was done. Most businesses at some point are going to have a minor infraction, but when the city identifies a life safety issue, we immediately work with the business to abate the danger." But how is the city to identify life safety issues with unpermitted building renovations when they fail to conduct a building inspection? The Office of the Mayor also said, quote, "To our knowledge, the work done without permits did not create life safety issues or limit the ability for people to get in and out of the club. But without building inspections of the unpermitted work or an investigation, the city's knowledge is extremely limited, so there is no justification for this statement. Furthermore, we know that this is a lie, that the unpermitted work did create life safety issues and limited the ability for people to get out of the club. This is documented in reporting by the Orlando Sentinel on Pulse's unpermitted fence. Even before it was published, law enforcement knew that portions of the fence surrounding Pulse had been knocked down by victims trying to flee the premises. The office of the mayor also stated, quote, "In fact, we understand a wall was removed, which would have made it easier for people to move around." This statement not only further downplays the severity of Pulse's unpermitted construction, but it also is an effort to cover up all the violations that the city failed to publicly identify. While touting the illegal removal of a wall, the office of the mayor concealed the unpermitted work that affected the life, death, and injury of shooting victims. The added wall and hallway, the missing tables and chairs for a restaurant, the added stages, the dance floor, the boarded up windows, the moved doors, the remodeled bathrooms, and the remodeled dressing rooms. All of these can be seen when comparing the same floor plans that the city used to make the determination that a wall was removed. On a printout of Pulse's 2004 building plans labeled Bad Originals, someone wrote that a wall had been removed and the bar had been reconfigured. They stopped there. Still, city attorneys did not mention the reconfigured bar to commissioners or any of the illegal renovations that were not marked. They only told them about the wall that was removed in an effort to depict that unpermitted work done at the bar actually helped victims. This is their first attempt at covering it all up. The office of the mayor also failed to note why the wall was removed. It was removed illegally to expand the nightclub's unpermitted dance floor. And for years, it was not a wall at all. It was a long, accordion-style wooden door that was usually open most of the time to allow for more dancing. This is documented in the city's own records and is further evidence of why an inspection and a criminal investigation should have been conducted. The city ignored the unpermitted work that was done inside of Pulse, even after the shooting. It's also worth noting again that the floor plans do not portray Pulse's second floor. The city of Orlando gave the FBI floor plans that did not accurately depict the building. Responding OPD officers even had to modify the layouts provided to them when they were being interviewed for an internal investigation. Another thing that is not visible on any of the floor plans are the stages go-go dancers used in Pulse's Adonis room. This is important because records do not show that these stages were ever taken into consideration when Pulse's occupant loads were calculated. The entire layout of the Adonis room and bar do not match the building plans. The office of the mayor repeatedly claimed in their Q&A document that additional lives could not have been saved. They stated, quote, "We don't believe there were any life safety issues inside the building that would prevent people from getting out of the building or rescuers from getting in. And, quote, just because the work was unpermitted doesn't mean that it was done improperly. If there are issues that would prevent ingress or egress, people getting in and out, corrective action would have been taken immediately." Again, the city is trying to downplay the seriousness of unpermitted work. And these too are false statements. The fire inspections, to the city's own admission, have contained reporting errors and are not as comprehensive as other types of inspections. Fire inspections are not a substitute for building inspections. We also know from the city's own records that the permitting division also interfered with the fire department's inspections. Records show that the permitting division's Timothy Johnson said that new building plans were not required for Pulse's unpermitted renovations, even though these were requested by the fire department. We can also see that the fire department required the installation of a fire suppression sprinkler system. However, Timothy Johnson told them that this was not needed. And finally, we can see that fire inspectors did in fact note an issue with egress in an inspection. On June 1st, 2010, a warning was created stating, "This building may require the addition of a fire protection sprinkler system and additional means of egress. Verify the scope of work on any new permits to determine whether these additional life safety features are to be included. Any new work will need to include all changes made to the interior and exterior of the business. Changes have been made to the plumbing, walls have been removed, and the bar has been relocated. Also, the deck at the front with plumbing is new and unpermitted work." Contrary to what the Office of the Mayor claimed in the Q&A document, we know that corrective action was not immediately taken. As a result of the city's inaction, shooting survivors had to navigate narrow hallways, a dark building with covered windows, and then jump over a 6-foot-tall fence and knock it down in order to escape to safety. The Q&A document also states, quote, "Based on the fire department's records, Pulse's occupancy levels were generally in compliance. Recent records indicate that there was not a pattern of being over capacity." Of the fire inspections released to the public, many of which were only exit checks, 7 referred directly to the nightclub's occupancy and practices around maintaining the legal occupant limit. In addition to fire inspections, other documents also show the nightclub's capacity was a concern on more than one rare occasion. An email from Lieutenant Mark E. Riplinger, sent on May 4th, 2007, stated, quote, "We recently had an OPD officer tell she frequently thinks the Pulse on the corner of Orange and Esther is overcrowded. Also, Esther Street will be lined with cars making passage of a fire truck doubtful at times. Wednesday and Saturday seem to be the busiest times." This email shows precisely why conditional use approval is required where Pulse is zoned, which Dean Grandin stated in his letter 3 years prior when he said, quote, "Indoor recreation requires conditional use approval in the AC-N/T zoning district, reflecting the potential increased impact of use, especially in proximity to a residential neighborhood." This is also why neighbors complained about the Pulse nightclub 3 years later in 2010 and held a community meeting with the Orlando Police Department specifically about Pulse. A 2009 incident report also states that proper protocol was not being followed and that, quote, "management could not give an accurate occupant count and was not using handheld clickers to keep an accurate occupant load below 299. To this day, the city of Orlando has never released the exact number of people who were inside the nightclub at the time of the shooting. We know that the National Compassion Fund has counted 304 victims, which is over Pulse's legal limit. Based on prior mass shootings, it is likely that 304 is an undercount, because usually not all victims apply for the funds collected by the National Compassion Fund. We also know from the One Pulse Foundation's Memorial and Museum Design Competition that the architects were incorporating 268 survivors and 49 people murdered into their designs. If these numbers are accurate, this would mean that there were a total of 317 people in the nightclub, also over Pulse's legal limit. Furthermore, a local news station documented that the city of Orlando itself initially reported that there were 321 people in the nightclub. The report states that the lawyer representing the nightclub, Gus Benitez, first said the 321 number came from the club's clicker counter. Then he said it did not, and provided reporters with a staff estimate of 150 to 200 people, which is substantially less than the number of victims documented. Then the nightclub's lawyer said he believed that Pulse, quote, did not track how many people left that night before the shooting. This would mean that the nightclub did not do what the city required. The city repeatedly reminded Pulse to maintain an occupancy count at all times to ensure the safety of its customers. There are no documents that show that the nightclub was ever cited or fined for any infractions after the shooting. The city has claimed there are no responsive records related to this number or the total of number of people inside a Pulse at the time of the shooting. There are no transcripts, speech drafts, memos, or notes with this number. There is also no record of what the number was on the nightclub's clicker counter, which they were required to use at all times to keep an accurate count of those inside the club. We should know, definitively, 5 years after the shooting, how many victims there were in the nightclub, and the city should be able to confirm this without hesitation. The office of the mayor also lied when it stated in the Q&A document, quote, there is reference that there were discussions to increasing occupancy level, but our records reflect that never occurred. This is not true, and we can discern the truth by putting together the city's own records. The approved 2004 floor plans show Pulse's maximum load was 223 people. On a paper with the date January 19th, 2005 written on it, the occupancy load was calculated to be 344 persons, with the note at the top stating, quote, can post at 299 until fire alarm system. Weeks later, on February 5th, 2005, a letter stated it must remain at 299 until, quote, it is shown to be a higher number through a permit from the Office of Permitting Services or through a decision from the Board of Appeals. The occupant load remained at 299 for years, but then on May 16, 2009, it changed to 430 when the occupant load was reevaluated. Roughly 2 weeks later, on April 8, 2009, Wendy Baker, an employee of the Pumas, wrote to the fire marshal and asked for an extension to install the required fire alarm, saying, quote, we have no money to install such an elaborate system at this time. This fire alarm system was installed later that year. However, records show that the paid monitoring was canceled on July 28, 2011. The monitoring company wrote the city and actually reported the unpermitted work done at Pulse to the fire department, along with the canceled contract. No records have been released of any proof that the system was working with a monitoring company after the contract was canceled in 2011, proof that the city required. On April 20th, 2009, Pulse's new occupant load of 430 was issued, and sent to Pulse via certified mail. Confirmation that Pulse's occupancy level was in fact increased again. But then the fire marshal put a temporary occupancy load to 300 and remarked, "Install sprinkler system." Another document stated that this was a temporary occupancy load until the sprinkler suppression system was installed per City Fire Code 24.27. This was around the same time that the unpermitted work was documented. The April 30th, 2010 fire inspection also noted code 1.3.6.3, stating, quote, repairs, renovations, alterations, reconstruction, change of occupancy, and additions to building shall conform with NFPA 101 Life Safety Code and the adopted building code of the jurisdiction. Less than 2 weeks later, on May 12, 2010, the fire department documented that the owners would need to, quote, provide new floor plans, drawings, to the Office of Permitting Services for occupant load evaluation. However, the fire inspector, Thomas Blaha, also noted, quote, per Tim Johnson, no new plans required at this time, per property manager after meeting with Tim Johnson. According to the fire department, Tim Johnson of the permitting division also stated that the suppression system was not needed and it was never installed. On May 14th, 2010, a sign for 360 was issued to Pulse and a letter was drafted noting yet another occupancy load increase. However, the 360 person limit seemed to have disappeared from subsequent records, while both the 430 and 300 numbers remained on Pulse's fire inspections up until 2016. On November 18, 2011, one inspector noted the 430 occupancy load with a question mark. They wrote, "Not sure what this is," showing that fire inspectors were also confused by Pulse's occupancy limits, as well as Pulse's designation as both a bar and nightclub, for which it listed two separate occupancy load limits. It is also worth noting that even though the square footage of the building did not change and its parking lot shrank due to the illegal patio enclosed by an unpermitted fence, the building's maximum occupancy increased from 75 when it was Lorenzo's restaurant to 299 and above when it was Pulse. This dramatic increase was noted by neighbors who were furious over Pulse operating as a nightclub in their neighborhood. One neighbor in an email stated, quote, "We were told it had a max capacity of 400 per the fire marshal. Kind of funny when the restaurant only had seating for 75 and a parking lot with 6 to 8 spaces." It is also worth noting that these occupancy load changes were made despite what the 2005 letter stated. It said, Pulse, quote, must remain at 299 until it is shown to be a higher number through a permit from the Office of Permitting Services or through a decision from the Board of Appeals. The fact that Pulse's occupant load did not remain at 299 and was changed without a permit or without approval from the Board of Appeals may be why city attorneys in their Q&A document did not want to acknowledge the changes that were made without permits or decisions from the Board of Appeals. Former Pulse employees may not want to speak out about the unpermitted renovations and code violations because they signed many of the fire inspection documents, some of which stated no changes in floor plans, even though changes were made to the floor plans without permits. The following statement in the Q&A document is also evidence that the office of the mayor was trying to cover up the violations at Pulse before even knowing all the facts, by providing contrived scenarios that again painted the scene as if there were absolutely no issues at Pulse. There is a picture that shows what looks like a Coke machine knocked over near an exterior wall. This picture was taken after the incident, leaving questions to consider like, given the location, it could have been knocked over when OPD breached the wall, at which time victims had already exited the building. The Coke machine was actually a cooler that the police had to knock over in order to gain entry to the building. It was by gaining entry through this space that they were finally able to locate hostages who were trapped in the neighboring dressing room. The hostages heard the police enter through the wall and were able to use that to communicate their location over the phone. We know this from the interviews that resulted from an internal OPD investigation. The following audio clip was obtained on June 30th, 2021 through a public records request and was not previously released to the public. It is of a sworn interview with Officer Timothy Stanley.
Came back, gave him the report, and they were still setting up stuff here. Then Captain Canny asked if we could breach this door to go see if this door breaches. And I think that that door is opening the wrong way. I think it opens right to left, out. But
Oh, it opens up?
yeah, I think
Okay.
it opens that way.
Okay.
Pretty sure from what I remember. We had to check this door, and we had to move some, there was a Coke machine or something there that we had to pull away to be right for a team to go in.
Okay.
Went up, pulled the door, and that freaking door opened. Like it was caught initially, but then it popped open that far. Then all of a sudden I heard voices up here to my left whispering, "We're right here."
The hostages had to be extricated from the dressing room through a hole in the wall made for a small air conditioning unit. This dressing room was also renovated without permits, which we can see when we compare the 2004 floor plans with those from 2010. So the cooler was in the way of first responders and was moved before victims were out of the building, not after or when OPD breached the wall, which is the scenario that the office of the mayor told city commissioners to consider. It's also important to note that when OPD breached the wall, the victims had not exited the building. This, too, was a lie. Why would OPD need to breach the wall if there were no victims left in the building? So the question here is, why would the office of the mayor fabricate scenarios to disprove potential violations at Pulse? Why not investigate before disseminating misinformation? Why not inspect the building? Why did the office of the mayor release statements contrary to the facts? What's even more concerning is that the city released inaccurate building plans to the public, resulting in the misinterpretation of facts. The building plans the city gave to the public showed a door that was not there. With this information, news agencies reported to the public that the building plan showed that the Coke cooler did not block an exit, but instead it blocked a storage room door to the outside of the building. This door was completely boarded over at the time of the shooting, again without permits. So when law enforcement moved the cooler away from a door, what door did they move the cooler away from? To date, there has been no inspection of Pulse's unpermitted work and no criminal investigation. The office of the mayor continues to lie and make false statements about the circumstances surrounding one of the nation's deadliest mass shootings. And those false statements continue to originate not only from city attorneys, but also from the city's public information officers. We can glean from the Surfside condo collapse in Miami that occurred on June 24th, 2021, that there can, indeed, be life safety issues for years when buildings are not properly inspected. The difference is that the condo collapse is being investigated. No one has investigated the unpermitted renovations and code violations at Pulse. When investigations were done in similar situations, the owners were charged with manslaughter and sent to prison. In Orlando, owner Barbara Poma is making a six-figure salary to turn the mass shooting into a tourist attraction and gift shop through the nonprofit she started. The most recent financial audit shows she is also charging rent to the One Pulse Foundation, which has spent millions of dollars improving the Pulse property that she and her husband still own. Also remember that there's more, so much more that we cannot possibly cover it all in video. For instance, we did not even mention the beaded curtains, which appear to be a fire code violation, and that they were hanging over doorways and concealed the visibility of the main entrance and exit from the unpermitted hallway. We know through surveillance footage and police body cam footage that these beaded curtains obstructed the visibility of law enforcement who were trying to look inside the nightclub to locate victims and the shooter upon entering the building during an active shooting. Demand justice for those murdered at Pulse. Demand an investigation. Call the city, call the state attorney, call the Florida Attorney General, call the Department of Justice, call the FBI Tampa office, call whoever you can. And please share this video. Help us get justice for Pulse.